Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the International Rare Disease Showcase brought to you by Beacon. Really glad to be here. The sessions are coming thick and fast today, but hopefully we can really dive into an exciting session here, which is looking much more at the development of treatments in the world of rare conditions. So, as always, we're going to start with a little thank you to those people who've helped to make the event today possible. So, firstly, thank you to our corporate partner Healx, who are here presenting within this session. Our three gold sponsors, Pulse InfoFrame, Bionicle EMAS, and Apparito. Our silver sponsor, Usa Pharma, and our bronze sponsors, Gilead, PTC Therapeutics, Roche, and Rhythm Pharmaceuticals. And of course, thank you to the Lottery Community Fund who've given us a grant to help do this kind of event as well. That kind of support means a lot to us, and it's great to see that we're able to keep this moving and so successful so far. Okay, so this session is all about the road to treatment, finding ways to collaborate and innovate to get new therapies for rare conditions. That's what we really want to see. I'm your host today. I keep popping up here and there. I'm Rick, CEO of Beacon, if you haven't come up with that so far, and always happy to take questions and interact with you as much as possible. So please do share your thoughts, your responses in our chat box down here, and questions you have, we'll do our best to answer during the session today. So the road to treatment, I'm joined by a really interesting panel here today, and we're going to try and really take this from start to completion. We've got a set of talks that are hopefully going to take us from the place where we're thinking about how to come up with a concept for a rare condition, how to get that early stage clinical research moving forward, through then into the stages of clinical development and the delivery of clinical trials, particularly multinational clinical trials and the challenges there, and also trials delivered in people's own home. And from there, then thinking about how you actually go about delivering the drug that has been developed to the patient, in particular with some of the really complex advanced therapies we're starting to see moving into the market. So the full spectrum today, delivered by an excellent group of speakers. As you can see, we're joined by people from the Foundation Telethon in Italy, the team at Healx, the World Duchenne organization, and the team I've worked with really closely at MCDS Therapy. So I'm really excited to highlight that. Okay, that's the end slide, which we don't want to be seeing, so I'll wait on there. With that, then I think let's just dive straight in. I think it's really important to get our speakers moving, and I'd like to start really at the start with a talk from Tim Dreyer. So Tim's joining us, he's now at the Royal Veterinary College, but originally based out of South Africa. Tim is a great speaker who's going to talk about his kind of personal experience as being a person living with a rare condition, but also a researcher, and how he's beginning to move forward research in that area. So Tim, I will stop my screen share and welcome you to the stage.
Right, hi everyone. Right, so hi, well, thank you for the opportunity to share with you our ongoing journey to a rare treatment. I would like to show you or give you an example of what progress and collaboration often look like, the perseverance and persistence required, and to make it all happen, and ultimately what we can learn from that to make it easier and possible for others to in the same situation. So I am one of very few people in the world with sclerosis, an incredibly rare condition, a bone condition of which only approximately 100 cases have been documented, 2/3 of them which are from the Afrikaner descent in South Africa, my homeland. So what exactly is sclerosis? It's an autosomal recessive condition that is characterized by excessive bone formation, variable fused fingers and toes, as well as dysplastic or absent nails are the earliest postnatal indicators of this condition. The next indicator is usually recurrent facial paralysis during the earlier years of life. And this is the problem here, is often misdiagnosed. The nerve palsies are caused by generalized skeletal overgrowth that is most pronounced in the skull and jaw, and long bones, and usually this results in a tall stature, various degrees of hearing loss, and increased pressure on the brain, which can be lethal if not managed. So the big problem for us is that there is no treatment for sclerosis. It's currently only managed through surgical interventions. These include decompression of intracranial nerves, is relieving of potential lethal elevated intracranial pressure, as well as inner ear surgery to save or regain hearing. Hearing is usually also assisted through hearing aids, but these measures are quite effective, but the surgeries are difficult and prolonged, often ranging from 6 to 9 hours due to the excessive and abnormally hard bone, and it can often result in unexpected complications. So, and the worst part really is that post-surgical regrowth of the bone often occurs and may cause recurrence of symptoms, usually necessitating repeat surgeries. And so although the condition stabilizes in late 20s or early 30s, new treatment options would bring significant benefit to our patients. So the first step towards a treatment is, determining what actually causes it. So sclerosis has been extensively studied through the last 4 decades through many scientists ranging from the US, South Africa, the UK, and mutations in the SOS gene that result in loss of functional sclerostin protein was identified as the cause. This particular protein, sclerostin protein, is important for bone maintenance or homeostasis, and plays a key role in preventing excessive bone formation. So with this knowledge, Mr. James Bertoli, the father of a sclerosis patient, he proposed that sclerostin could be treated by actually restoring the lost sclerostin protein in patients. So the idea seems rather straightforward, but finding researchers and finding collaboration to test whether it works has been a very difficult and long process. So when the first university was approached with this proposal in 2010, no meaningful progress was made. At the same time, two South African sclerosis specialists, surgeons, Dr. Hammersma and Dr. Hofmeyr, also reached out to local and international colleagues in an attempt to get the research underway. The protein replacement proposal was submitted to the University of Pretoria, and conducting research at the university was not possible at that time. But there was a strong possibility of collaboration with University of St. Louis in the US. This was really the first indication of an international collaboration to tackle this disease. So the problem here was that to get this collaboration underway was predicted to be quite an arduous process that could take 6 years or more. So many young patients would thus likely not really see any benefits from a treatment before the age of 20. So Mr. Wright, however, continued his lateral research, and in 2014, a paper from Chan et al. I didn't show you. A paper from Chan et al. Indicated that sclerosing bone disorders can actually be reversed by altering the Wnt signaling pathway. So this gave Mr. Wirth a renewed confidence that protein replacement could actually work, and it's resulted in him renewing his search for researchers and collaborators. So in 2015, this proposal finally reached Professor Vinny Naidu, who is the current dean of the veterinary science faculty at the University of Pretoria. And so he said that, well, he decided to oversee the project and allocate it to a PhD student who in the end turned out to be me. As I was finishing my master's degree in molecular medicine, Mr. Britha actually asked me whether I would be willing to do the research. And honestly, at that point, my goal was to do medical research, but it never really occurred to me that I could actually research my own disease, and possibly develop a treatment for it. So, but I think maybe because the worst was actually over for me at the time. But my interest was piqued, and this disease that I've carried with me my entire life suddenly became my target, and I threw everything at it. So so here we had a patient doing his own research. So by 2016, the research project was officially underway, with the bulk of funding coming from a private donor linked to a patient. Another potential collaboration arose when Novartis offered to provide sclerosis mouse models for the project. So how our biggest collaboration came about is quite a really interesting story. While writing my proposal, I requested a protocol to maze sclerostin from a scientist at UCB Pharma. He was happy to provide it, and a handful more researchers were happy to share insight and advice. Many people don't realize, but scientists are really happy to share information and help where they can if you just ask. But at the same time, Mr. Bertha and Dr. Hamsma were in contact with a professor at Leiden University, Professor Socrates, in the Netherlands, who worked on Van Buchem disease, which is a bone condition that bears some similarity to sclerosis. This professor, in turn, was in contact with the head of the bone division at UCB, and he asked them whether they would actually assist, as UCB at the time has studied sclerosis quite extensively in a bid to develop a successful osteoporosis drug for the company. So here we had two top people at the same company hearing about our project essentially at the same time, resulting in our collaboration between UCB and University of Pretoria. UCB provided the necessary facilities, resources and expertise, allowing us to start the research immediately, saving us really valuable time. This collaboration brought together some of the best minds related to sclerosis and allowed me to simultaneously raise awareness of our rare disease among scientists, health professionals, and of the public across the world. Then, as we all know, in 2019, COVID-19 happened. This prevented us from doing any additional experiments, but fortunately, we had enough data. Unfortunately, the proteins were not as effective as we hoped it would be. Just very briefly, we tested natural sclerostin, what they call wild-type sclerostin, as well as two modified versions with parts of an antibody to increase the protein half-life, as well as an amino acid chain that could potentially improve localization to bone. One of the things that would be beneficial in a treatment is some changes were seen in the skeletons of the sclerosis mouse models. These came from UCB. So changes were seen in these mouse models treated with a protein that contained both the antibody part as well as the amino acid chain. And the problem was that these changes were quite modest. And moreover, we also observed anti-drug antibodies, which did not bode well for a long-term treatment, as it would likely decrease the efficacy over time. So we had to decide then whether we want to refine our existing approach or whether we try something new. So in one of the breakout sessions yesterday, there was a discussion about drug-free repurposing, and that is exactly what we decided to do, as it really seems like the fastest way to get a treatment to patients, as things were taking quite long now. So yeah, so we decided to see whether there are existing drugs or drugs that are currently in development that could be beneficial for sclerosis. Dr. Scott Roberts at the Royal Veterinary College in the UK and I put together a proposal, and with continued funding from UCB, I'm currently initiating a new project that will investigate existing drugs that can modulate major signaling pathways associated with sclerosis. And then, of course, if these drugs prove to be effective, we aim to repurpose them, potentially accelerating sclerosis treatment to the clinic. So, and it's on another note, throughout this whole process, we also raised awareness of this disease and the seriousness of the associated pathology by doing international and local interviews. The local ones were particularly important as sclerosis occurs predominantly in South Africa, and earlier diagnosis should result in earlier implementation of the preventative measure. So we also found the Rare Bone Disease Foundation, which aimed to raise awareness as well. This has been quite effective in that regard, especially through social media, where we've had two families that were able to get an earlier diagnosis when members or friends of these families recognized symptoms that were mentioned on our group or in interviews. So the platform is also further used for fundraising and provides a support platform for patients and their families. So the big thing here is what can we take away from all of this? It really takes a lot of time and perseverance to get research off the ground. Fortunately, more and more companies are becoming aware of this issue, and I trust it will become easier with time. Then the art of getting any research underway is improved if we raise awareness and discuss the disease with everyone, from our doctors, researchers, and the public. And to get them to discuss with their networks. I mean, that's exactly how our collaboration started. So I do understand that it's not always easy, and I'm truly grateful for the opportunity given to us. Collaboration can turn tides, of course. It can provide funding, the necessary resources and expertise, which often drives innovation. In our case, we had a lot of input from a lot of different researchers as to how to go ahead, how can we improve on just natural sclerosis in order to bring a treatment about. So most importantly, it saved time, giving patients some hope that they could see a treatment while that would actually still be beneficial to them. So, and then lastly, patients really can become researchers too. We don't have to necessarily wait for someone else to do the studies. We can put ourselves in position to do it ourselves. And granted, it's not always easy, and we have to leave our comfort zones, but it is definitely possible. And to be honest, it's incredibly rewarding and exciting. So, but yeah, thank you.
Tim, thank you so much. I really enjoyed the presentation and really glad that we got you on stage to talk and share your experience. I think it's great to see that what you're doing and moving into that research field. As we've got a quick question that's directly relevant to you, I'll ask it now. We've got someone asking in the chat have there been kind of any ethical issues or concerns you've had that come up while researching your own condition? And I suppose within that, what are the strengths of doing that, in your opinion?
So I think our biggest ethical issue at the beginning was really more that, although a lot of research has been done, a lot of it was done by companies that kind of got benefited from, learning about the mutation. And so we kind of, or not, some people felt that they're technically obligated to help us, seeing as they got a lot of help from us, not necessarily directly, but, well, actually it is directly because it's a disease that we all have. But apart from that, like for myself, I never really had any issues with sharing with anyone, or I mean, the goal was to get research underway because the longer we took, the longer it's going to take to actually get something that might help patients. I hope that answers your question.
Absolutely. Yeah, Tim, thank you. It's always good to chat to you. It's great to hear your presentation. I think people are responding really positively in the chat. So we'll probably maybe bring you back later if we have time for a question session at the end. Thank you, Tim.
No problem.
And with that, I will welcome our next speaker to the stage. So as I mentioned earlier, we're kind of working through the earlier stages of development in this session up towards the way drugs are delivered. And our second talk is going to come from Simone Manso from Healx. And he's going to be talking about the work that Healx have been doing in developing therapies and treatments for neurofibromatosis. So Simone, welcome to the stage, and we look forward to hearing from you.
Can you see me?
We can indeed, sir. Thank you.
So thanks for having me here today. It's a pleasure. I'm the head of neurofibromatosis therapy development at Healx. I'm going to talk you a bit about my journey. I'm going to talk you a bit about Healx, neurofibromatosis, and I'm going to put today the emphasis on our collaboration with patient groups. So let me start a bit with myself. A few years ago, I didn't know much about rare diseases, and I knew nothing about neurofibromatosis. And then neurofibromatosis joined our life and our family suddenly. And that, of course, gave us a sort of an electroshock, right? And you have the typical sort of change management curve when I went for sort of an acceptance / digestion phase. And then I started to realize that with rare diseases, success and treatments happen only when the community get mobilized. So patient groups, families, patients. I think Tim just showed this example brilliantly. And when all of these happen, then treatments happen, or there is a highest likelihood that treatment happens. If not, it's very hard. And so when I realized that, then I started to be involved, and I asked myself, hey, what can I do here? And I joined the Children's Tumor Foundation, which is the leading not-for-profit on neurofibromatosis, with the aim to end NF. And I was lucky enough that my path also crossed with Healx, and Healx decided to tackle neurofibromatosis. And essentially, then we started to collaborate, and this over the years, it gradually became my full-time job now, which is, of course, for me more than a job. And I'm happy that neurofibromatosis now it's one of the advanced preclinical programs at Healx. Okay, so Healx was born in 2014 with this picture in mind. It was funded by Tim Gillians and Dave Brown. I'm not going to read you out loud these numbers because unfortunately many of you are familiar with them. And it's an artificial intelligence powered company that it's essentially deploying technology and expertise to find treatments for rare diseases. And since inception, we made a fantastic progress, and we have the first clinical trial that is about to start in Fragile X syndrome. We have 20 preclinical and clinical programs in our pipeline. We have 10 technology methods that we deploy in different ways to tackle different diseases. And all of this is fueled and enabled by 100 and more team people right now, and we are continuing to grow, and also by significant funds we received by investors that deeply believe in our mission and what we are doing at Healx. We tend to collaborate quite a lot with patient groups, with universities, and also with other companies. And today I'm going to put the emphasis more on the collaboration with patient groups, and I'm going to use the project that I'm leading on NF as an example. A bit about neurofibromatosis. There are 3 types of neurofibromatosis. NF, you can also call it NF, NF1, NF2, and schwannomatosis. And NF1, which is the current focus at Healx, is the most common of the three. 1 out of 3,000 people in the world have it. So that means more than 2 million people worldwide, and affects all genders, race, ethnicities equally. And it's caused by a germline mutation of the NF1 gene, which essentially encodes the protein neurofibromin. And it's a tumor predisposition syndrome, and with tumors that tend to grow along the peripheral nervous systems. And you have the plexiform neurofibromas. These are slow-growing, big tumoral masses that tend to grow usually in pediatric age. And 10 of them turn into malignant peripheral nerve sheath tumors, or MPNST, and which is essentially is the true nightmare when you have NF, because the survival rate after 2 years, if you get an MPNST, it's very poor. Then you also have cutaneous neurofibromas. These are little benign tumors that grow on the skin. They tend to grow after puberty. And to give an example, by the age of 40, around 80–90% of patients have more than 100 of these tumors everywhere in the body. And then there are the optic pathway gliomas. So that are tumors that grow on the optic pathway, and which can create a lot of problem with vision. Then there are many other challenges like learning challenges and scoliosis, bone problems, and others too. There are around 3,000 mutations. That means that unfortunately, for which we only know the 10% of the genotype-phenotype correlations, and that means that it's quite hard to predict which symptoms are gonna hit you if you have NF1. The opportunity to do something good for patients is great and is there, because there is a high unmet need. There is only one treatment approved that works only for one symptoms and only for a subset of patients, and all other symptoms have no treatments. And also because NF gene and the protein neurofibromin are highly relevant to cancer, so there is a potential for indication expansion. I'm now going to focus on our collaboration with the Children Tumor Foundation and in the neurofibromatosis project. And this is an example of many other collaborations that Healx has with other patient groups for other rare diseases that we tackle. So you can see here in this slide from the foundation, this is the focus of the foundation, is to end NF by connecting the sometimes unconnected parties that are key in accelerating treatments, by catalyzing discoveries, by investing in research, both on the basic and translational side, by enabling paths to better treatments, and also by essentially deliver to accelerate for better treatments to patients. So there is a lot of connection here and a lot of platform and basic infrastructures that are extremely useful for companies like Healx to then start investing on the disease. When I think with the foundation at, I think that it's essentially putting a sort of a red carpet to a company that wants to invest in disease and remove all the blockers along the way, and that's what the foundation does. And everything is done always with the patients in the middle and at the heart of it, and this essentially it fuels the foundation to continue to work relentlessly towards a cure. Here you can see essentially how we tend to work with the Children Tumor Foundation and also with all the other patient groups. So from one side, on the patient groups, you have disease knowledge, clinical scientific networks, and also real life patients experience, which is crucial. And from Healx side, you have the clinical and drug discovery expertise, you have the financial resources, and also you have our AI technology engine that essentially helps us to predict predict treatments. And of course, then along the journey, there are different touch points and different sort of sub-collaborations within the foundation. And just to give you an example, when we started the project, it was extremely useful to start navigating all the data that are available on NF, because a company like Healx needs strongly data to support our predictions. And then there was a lot of help on accessing all the data platforms, on the patient registries, and so on. Then along the way, when you move into the preclinical, clinical stage, it's extremely important to navigate the world and understand which preclinical model are most suitable, how can we access them, and also accessing the key opinion leaders that can help tremendously in planning, for example, preclinical studies and also clinical studies. Couple of learnings from my side since I started this chapter of my life. So first of all, I'm a big believer that there are tremendous opportunities when patient groups, companies, and universities work together. And it's important to keep an open mind, because sometimes all of us might have had a bad experience in the past that could somehow bias our own reaction to a possible collaboration. So we should all strive to have an open mind when pushing for collaborations and when starting collaborations. And this is extremely important also to understand where others are coming from, and ultimately to develop trust at a personal level, because with trust, then you're setting all the basis to work effectively together. It's also very important to clarify roles and expectations up front. And I don't mean here to write a book of 100 pages with a lot of legal terms on how the collaboration should work. I mean here rather to clarify at a high level and at a fundamental level who is doing what and what are the boundaries of the collaboration. And if this is done properly upfront, a lot of time is saved then along the way. I also learned that failure happens a lot in science, and we should embrace it. We should learn from it. And by the way, we should all in the community make failures more public. That's something very important. I think that is not happening a lot yet in the world. And I also find out at the same time that things can get stuck for what I would call the wrong reasons. For example, a legal contract, or different views on IP clauses, or other type of administrative things. And when things tend to get stuck there, I think we should all push, because it's not a good reason at all to stop any type of collaboration. We should really push to remove blockers. And finally, I came to the realization that together we can all change the world. And I feel that we can do a lot for the rare disease community and with the rare disease community. At the same time, also my personal reflection was that at a personal level, we should all try to focus on where we can best serve the purpose that we want to serve, because it's so easy to essentially get distracted with 1,000 things to do. And because they're all important, but then at the end to add value, we should try to go deeper in perhaps a few topics, because when you go deeper and when you're able to go deeper, this is when the needle starts really to move. Okay, I think I'm finished talking for the moment. What I would like to do, if possible, is to ask you a couple of questions via Menti, because we are going to have a breakout session later on, and we're going to continue this discussion. And I would like to ask you just a couple of questions via Menti. Question number one: have you collaborated within the rare disease community? Yes or no? Okay, the vast majority has clearly collaborated with the rare disease community, and this is going to help the workshop and the discussion we will have later. Trying to move to the next. Which areas of collaboration do you need help with? We're going to have a discussion later along these lines to try to discuss all together and come up with ideas on how to remove barriers and tackle problems that we all have found along the way, I'm sure. That's really interesting. Thank you. I'm not going to comment it now in the interest of time. We will do it later together. Thank you. And finally, we have the last question. Here we go. It finally came up. This is an open text question, is the last one, where you could identify any other areas in essentially improving collaboration based on the question we just had. If there is any other areas, any comment you can make, that would be great. And we'll take it from there then at the workshop later.
That is the greatest single response I've seen. Well done, modern world. Simone, I think we'll let these text responses trickle in the background if that's all right. And thank you, like seriously, for a really, really interesting, engaging talk. We've not sat down and spoken before this, and your background's fascinating. I think there's a lot of things that you said that really resonated with me, and I'm sure with the audience as well, particularly some of your personal learnings and some of the barriers that you see to projects. And we've all been there and experienced something looking smooth and then a legal contract or something about tech gets in the way, and it's very frustrating. To see that called out is great, and finding ways to move forward is brilliant. And I also really like the way you talked about the role of the patient group. You know, laying out that red carpet to help companies come in without blockers. And I think that's a really important way for everyone to think about these things. You know, the work we want to try and do at patient organizations, if we're looking to get research collaboration moving forward, is to make our disease area more attractive. And that's exactly what you phrased there brilliantly. And, yeah, I mean, it was great to hear about your experience, and thank you for a great talk. So we will come back, and I'd love to hear about some of those short answers towards the end of the session, and I'd love to ask some more questions at that point. So Simone, thank you so much. Right, next on the main stage, then we're going to move from this kind of early stage thinking about the development and driving collaborations to get things happening in your conditions to actual work in the clinic and clinical trials. So I'm really pleased to welcome to the stage Dr. Michael Wright and Dawn Clewes, who are both based out of Newcastle, to talk about the work that they've been doing on MCDS therapy, which is an international EU-funded collaboration to repurpose the drug carbamazepine for the rare disease MCDS. And we worked on this together a little bit, and Michael's going to give a great talk, no doubt. So Michael, welcome and thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Rick, and thank you for the opportunity to speak to you this morning. As Rick says, my name's Michael Wright. I'm a paediatric geneticist. I work in Newcastle upon Tyne hospitals in the northeast of England. And I want to tell you a story that focuses on the last few years of work that we've been doing around a treatment for a rare bone condition called Schmidt-Metaphyseal dysplasia, but really begins 25 years ago when I first met a longtime friend and collaborator, Mike Briggs, who is the professor of skeletal genetics in Newcastle. And we set out then to find ways originally to help us improve and make quicker the diagnosis of rare bone conditions in the people that we were seeing. But ultimately, we hoped to develop some non-surgical therapies for some of the rare bone conditions. So this is a story of long-term collaboration, but also more recent collaboration, particularly with some other scientists that I'll tell you about in a minute that Mike has worked with and we've worked with over the last few years. Colleagues in other clinical areas, including my close colleague, Dr. Marta Bertoli here in Newcastle, who's the principal investigator for this trial in Newcastle, and Dr. Melita Irving at the Evelina Children's Hospital in London, who's the principal investigator for our site in London, and a large number of other clinicians in our other international sites that Dawn will tell you about shortly. But also Dawn and her team in our clinical trials unit in Newcastle, particularly Afnan Nadim, who have been fundamental in getting what has turned out to be an enormously complex trial off the ground. Our funders, the EU, who were confident enough to give us the money to do this, and perhaps most importantly, Rick and his team at Beacon, and most importantly of all, our participants in the trial and their families who've been willing to work with us to see if we can develop a new therapy for this condition. So let me tell you a little bit about the background to all of this. So if we could move on to the next slide, please, Don. So Schmidt-Metaphyseal dysplasia is a very rare bone condition, and that's our first challenge. So that's why this is a multi-site, multinational trial, because there are very few people with Schmidt-Metaphyseal dysplasia, but I'll explain to you why we chose to work on this condition just very shortly. And it's important to understand why this condition happens, and that's where the work of Mike Briggs and his team, and in particular Ray Boot-Hanford and Lorna Mullen in Manchester, who did a lot of the original work that I'll show you just in a minute, to help us to understand why this bone condition happens. And it's that understanding which gave us as clinicians a platform that we could build on to develop new therapies. And Schmidt-Metaphyseal dysplasia is due to a change in a gene that makes a protein called type 10 collagen, which is really important in bone formation and bone structure. And what happens in people who have Schmidt-Metaphyseal dysplasia is that there is a change in the type 10 collagen gene, and that results in a type 10 collagen protein, which folds up in a way that is different from normal, and gets essentially gets blocked in a bit of the cell called the endoplasmic reticulum, and that stresses the cells. And if we move on to the next slide, please, Don. As a result of that, the stress that the cells come under, what happens is that they move into a different process from normal in terms of the way that they are differentiating and growing. And the effect of that is to disrupt the way that bones grow. So this is a particularly important condition then in children and young people who have Schmidt-Metaphyseal dysplasia and are growing. And the effect of those changes is that the bones grow less quickly, and so people with Schmidt-Metaphyseal dysplasia are shorter than their peers, but importantly have bones which don't grow straight. They grow in a bowed way, as I'll show you just in a moment, and that affects the way in which the bone functions and results in pain for people with this condition. And it's that pain and bone bowing which perhaps most of all affects the quality of life of people with this condition. And so we set out originally to try to improve their quality of life, because as things stand at the moment, the only real treatment for that bowing is surgical. And so we thought, well, if we understand what's happening in this condition, and we know that basically what's going wrong is that the abnormal folding of this protein is putting the cells under stress, can we find any drugs that reduce that stress, and might they then be a potential treatment for Schmidt-Metaphyseal dysplasia? So if we move on to the next slide. So on the left there, you can see an X-ray of a child who has Schmidt-Metaphyseal dysplasia, and you can see around the knee there in the middle of that X-ray, you can see that the ends of the bones are broad, and the bones are bowed, and that's what I was describing to you. And it's that pattern which is very characteristic of Schmidt, and also results in pain. And all of those images in the middle there of the slide are from the work of Lorna Mullen and from Ray Boot-Hanford's group and Mike Briggs' group here in Newcastle. Looking in the panels on the left there, those coloured images are showing the effect of Schmidt-Metaphyseal dysplasia on growing bones, and the effect of a drug called carbamazepine. Now, carbamazepine is a well-established drug that we have a long history of using both in adults and importantly also in children, mainly for the treatment of seizures, but the treatment for some other conditions as well. But it's a drug that's been used for over 40 years in children, not to treat bone conditions, but at least we understand what this drug does, and we understand that it is safe and what the potential risks of the drug are. And so what Lorna and the group in Manchester and Mike's group in Newcastle were able to demonstrate was that if you treat mice who have Schmidt-Metaphyseal dysplasia with carbamazepine, then what the effect of that is to reduce ER stress, and secondly, the effect of that then is to result in the mouse model that you can see in the middle there, is to result in an improvement in the shape of the skeleton. And we wondered whether it might be possible for us then to model that in humans. So if we move on to the next slide, there was some evidence that this might be possible, because coincidentally there were some children with another bone condition called Schwartz-Jampel syndrome who had been treated with carbamazepine for other reasons. And interestingly, their bone symptoms had improved. So if we move on to the next slide. So we set out then to look at this. And one of the reasons that we were keen to look at this in this way is that we know that developing drugs for any therapy is extremely expensive. Now, if there are many people affected with a condition, then obviously the chances that pharma companies will be able to recover their investment are much greater, whereas, as is well known to this audience, that's much more of a challenge in rare conditions. So if we move on to the next slide. So the background to this trial then was that we knew that there was preclinical evidence supporting the fact that carbamazepine might be useful, that there was some clinical evidence in the patients with Schwartz-Jampel that it might be useful, and we were able then to get permission to use this drug and also to then begin to develop a clinical trial to use this drug as a treatment for Schmidt-Metaphyseal dysplasia. And if we move on to the next slide. And this is what it looks like. So as we all know, one of the big challenges of using trying to develop clinical trials in people with rare conditions is finding enough people to take part in the trial. And so one of the things that we decided to do was use a trial a model which others have used very successfully, where essentially we use those involved in the trial as their own controls by doing some baseline observation for a prolonged period of time, in our case 12 months, and then instituting treatment and looking for alterations after treatment. And so we started off in the UK looking to demonstrate that we could establish a safe dose for people with Schmidt, a safe dose of carbamazepine. And then we're now at the stage where we've done that, and we're moving on to treatment in the UK sites, but also in international sites. And Don will talk about that just in a moment. And so then if we move on to the next slide. And so what we're trying to demonstrate initially, our main objective was to demonstrate that carbamazepine is safe and tolerable for children with Schmidt-Metaphyseal dysplasia, because we're only treating children because the effect is on growing bone, and to work out whether the way in which this drug appears to work might warrant a much larger trial in the future. And then if we move on to the next slide. And the secondary things that we're looking for is to say, well, can we work out whether or not carbamazepine is actually having an effect? Now, we use height as a measure, not because it is the most important thing for patients with Schmidt-Metaphyseal dysplasia, but because it is something that we can measure effectively and is a reasonable indicator of the effect that carbamazepine is having on bone growth. And the second thing that we're looking at then is whether carbamazepine has an effect on bone pain in children with Schmidt. Because we know that pain is a particularly important issue for many children with Schmidt-Metaphyseal dysplasia. And then using some standardized measures, look at whether we're improving people's quality of life, which is the most important thing of all in using this treatment. Alongside that, we're also trying to work out whether we can develop some biomarkers which will tell us in the future whether or not the treatments that we are using are having an effect, so that we don't have to use surrogate measures like height, but we can actually see a measurable effect in a biomarker. So then if we move on to the next slide. So Don's going to tell you now. So Don is the senior member of the team from our clinical trials unit involved in this study, who's going to tell you now about the other aspects of the trial. So I'll hand over to Don now.
Thank you very much, Michael. So over the next few slides, I'll take you through kind of where we are currently with the trial and what progress we've made, and also talk a little bit about some of the challenges that we've faced with this trial and setting it up internationally. So as Michael said, I'm based at the Newcastle Clinical Trials Unit, which is part of Newcastle University here in the UK. And we are supporting the trial on behalf of the UK trial sponsor, which is the Newcastle upon Tyne Hospital's NHS Foundation Trust. So here in the UK, we actually have 2 sites participating, as Michael mentioned. So there is the site in Newcastle, and then we also have the site in London, which is part of Guy's and St Thomas's NHS Foundation Trust. As we've mentioned, this is an international collaboration. So we have partners throughout Europe and also in Australia. And those partners act also as trial sites for the trial, randomizing and intending to enroll patients into the stage 2. So we currently have partners in Belgium, Germany, France, Italy, and as I mentioned, Australia. But in addition to that, we have additional partners who help us operate the trial. So we have the Skyomics lab, which is based in Germany, who are doing the biomarker samples, which Michael just mentioned. We are also supported by Beacon, who've obviously organised this showcase today. And we're also supported by Novartis, which provide kind of project management from a European perspective and support us with the kind of grant and financial aspects. So it is a large collaboration involving kind of many partners. So where's the trial at now? So we have completed stage 1. It did occur just in the UK. Recruitment began into the trial in April 2019. So the sites in Newcastle and London opened in approximately the same time. And we've enrolled 11 patients. There was 4 in Newcastle and 7 in London. Our last participant was consented in January 2020. And as we said, we're aiming for 40 participants overall. So an extra 29 participants to be enrolled during our stage 2. It's a very exciting time for the trial at the moment, as our stage 2 is just opening. So here in the UK, we have performed the kind of training and the regulatory aspects for the trial, and we're expecting the Newcastle and London sites to begin recruitment very soon. They already have potential participants identified. It's been very exciting that our first international partner opened in December and have so far screened 4 participants to the trial in Australia. And then one of our partners in Italy are expecting to open in February or March 2022, and they're just in the process of finalising their regulatory approvals. Our other EU partners, so Belgium, France and Germany, are in the process of working through the regulatory kind of processes and approvals to be able to recruit to the trial. So it is a very exciting time with lots of activity. So for anybody on this platform today that's been involved in managing clinical trials, you will know that regardless of the size or the complexity, there are many challenges. It does require very efficient trial management. But for us, being an academic trials unit, we are more familiar with managing the kind of UK-based kind of non-commercial trials. So we don't have the scope and the reach of maybe a pharmaceutical company or a CRO. So it has been very challenging. And on the next slide, I'll share some of the challenges we did face. But as Michael said, our partners were selected based on their locations, their expertise in the field, and their available patient population, which is very important in rare diseases. We developed the protocol here in the UK with Michael and the team, and it was submitted to our Health Research Authority, which act as the Ethics Committee, and also our Medicines and Healthcare Regulatory Agency, the MHRA. We then provided those documents to the international partners, who have then developed them following their regulations for submission to their competent authorities and ethics committees. For this trial, we'll actually have one database, so all of the data is entered by the various partners directly into the database, and then that will be analysed here in the UK by the team in the UK. So some of the challenges we faced were, I think, around the international nature of the trials. So although the Newcastle Clinical Trials team have lots of experience managing large complex trials, as I mentioned, they are mainly UK based. So a lot of our challenges were around the international aspect, things like the timelines for submissions and approvals, protocol requirements. So some of our tests, particularly lab tests, as we're using local tests, not big central labs, we had to adapt the protocol to make sure we were capturing all the requirements of all the countries. As we're enrolling children into the trial, there are very specific regulatory processes in each country for assent and consent for patients to participate in trials. And one of the biggest challenges we faced is that here in the UK, as I mentioned, the trial sponsored by the Newcastle upon Tyne Hospital. And initially we had, the idea was that we would sponsor the trial from the UK across all international partners. But that did bring up some additional issues over oversight. The sponsor of any clinical trial remains responsible and accountable for everything that happens in the trial. And that was going to be a particular challenge, particularly because of language barriers. So all of the medical records would be in local languages. It would be very difficult for us to maintain adequate oversight. It was therefore decided that we would move to a kind of a country model. So each country, each of our international partners, they would sponsor their own trials. And so they would then maintain oversight for the trial itself, management, monitoring, and kind of all the training. And then so essentially we've got several different trials running to the same protocol and entering data into the same database. Again, this proved quite difficult because we here are managing the data. So there was a lot of delegation of duties and legal agreements and things like that. But I'm pleased to say, as we started to enroll patients into stage 2, we have overcome most of those challenges, and it is a very exciting time for us here. So I think that was all from me. My final comment is just going to be able to say, if you do want to find out more about our trial, then please check out our website or follow us on Twitter, both of which are on the screen now. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, both of you, Dawn. A really great summary of what you've been doing, and Michael, obviously a great introduction to the work of MCDS therapy. I think it's fair to say it's been a challenging project, but it's amazing how far we've got and where we are now. And you guys very graciously didn't mention the sudden appearance of COVID-19 slap bang in the middle of recruitment and the challenges that that's obviously brought and compounded to the work.
Yeah,
comment anything on that with Michael?
Yeah, all joking apart, Rick, there have been many times over the last few years where, for a number of different reasons, we've thought that we were going to really struggle to deliver this trial. COVID has hit us all, and I mean, we're fortunate, we're well and we're healthy, and thankfully all of our participants have remained healthy. However, in terms of the logistics of the trial, it was a complete hammer blow, and we had to halt the trial, as many people had to in terms of their clinical trials. Thankfully, we weren't into a treatment phase at that point. We were able to restart, and we've been able to successfully complete the first treatment phase. But that has been a real challenge for us. And as Dawn said, the other enormous challenge for us has been this issue of international sponsorship, which is inordinately complex, was not helped by a number of different changes in the political situation over the last few years, and that's made things even more complicated. but we've learned an enormous number of lessons from it. Having said that, I think for investigator-led rare disease clinical trials, there are some very important lessons that come out of this that are for discussion another day.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we'll make sure we find a way to share some of those and find the right forum to do that at the end of the project. But it's been a pleasure working with you both, and really great to hear this, and you know, to pay tribute at least to Michael for the sheer perseverance you've had to deal with through this project, and to still be going through the challenges we faced, and at the place where we're getting patients on drug it's really exciting, and I can't wait to see what happens over the next year. So thank you both for that presentation. I look forward to coming back to you at the end of the session for some more questions. Okay, guys, we're going to carry on with our overview now of the clinical situation we're trying to develop treatments for rare disease patients. And I'm really pleased to welcome to the stage Bart Lagerwaard, who's from the UMC Utrecht, along with Suzie-Ann Bakker from the World Duchenne Organization. So these guys are going to be talking to us a bit about some of the work involved at Trials at Home. So Bart, please, thank you, welcome, and take it away.
Thank you. Yeah, I will start sharing my screen. Thank you for the introduction and also the invitation for today. So my name is Bart, and together with Suzie-Ann, we will be talking about decentralized clinical trials. And if you don't know what decentralized clinical trials are, I'm pretty sure you will know by the end of the presentation, so I will get to that. But just as an introduction, we are both part of the Trials at Home Consortium, which is a big European consortium that is looking into the operational aspects, but also scientific aspects of decentralized clinical trials. And that's also what we will be talking about today. So first I will talk a little bit about decentralized clinical trials, and then about the specific trial that we are going to do. And then in the end, Suzie will take over and tell what maybe decentralized clinical trials can do for rare conditions. And she has also some recommendations for us all, so that's very exciting. So just before we can answer the question, is the decentralized trial the trial of the future? Just let me talk you through what I think are some big challenges of clinical trials currently. Well, clinical trials take quite long. From a drug to start the clinical trial process to hit the market can be over 10 years. And then if after 10 years you realize that the drug is very effective, you've lost actually quite a many of years withholding treatment from effective treatment for potential conditions and diseases. And on the other hand, if after 10 years you find out that the medicine is not so effective or maybe not so safe, you've actually put a lot of effort and resources, and also in the end money, into something that was didn't have any benefits. So what can be underlying that it takes so long for these clinical trials for the whole process of? First of all, it's quite difficult to include participants in your trials. And many trials face difficulties with inclusion. Some trials have to prematurely stop because they cannot reach, or not prematurely stop, but they have to stop because they cannot reach inclusion, enough inclusion. And also when you have those participants in your trial, it's often also difficult to keep them in your trial. Some trials are very long, or maybe they are also very demanding on participants. Maybe there are certain rules you have to follow. Maybe there's certain things you need to do. Maybe you should visit the clinic multiple times, or do certain stuff at the clinic, get something measured. So therefore, these things all contribute that clinical trials right now, they are actually quite expensive to run. And also there's more of an existential crisis, I would say, or existential issue with clinical trials, is that are clinical trials actually reflective of clinical practice or real life situation? You can imagine that maybe being in the trial makes you behave differently than if you would not be in a trial. And if you would go to the clinic, maybe you would feel different or do different things than if you are just at home. And also we can think, if clinical trials, if the population in clinical trials is actually so reflective of what the population is of the drug, that of the people that will actually take the drug in the end. So about decentralized clinical trials, they will make use of digital and medical technologies to move the setting of the trial closer to the participant. And what this effectively could mean is that, for example, you use telemedicine for consults or visits, and that would eliminate physically visiting, for example, the research clinic, allowing, for example, patients that live further away from the clinic also to join trials. And this could be because they live further away, but it can also be, for example, because they cannot go to the clinic because they don't have a car, or maybe they have difficulties moving about. And then if you're not at the clinic, how do you measure things in your participants? So of course, we've made great advances in wearable technologies that you could wear, and we could measure things in your daily setting. But we also send things to participants, such as the actual drug, the actual medicine. But you can also think about medical devices that can be used at home by the participant themselves, with or without guidance of the clinic. Another technology is, of course, the social media. Maybe with these technologies, we can reach a far different population that we could have not reached before. And you can also think about, maybe not unrelated to technologies, but we can also bring the trial to the participant home. For example, having a nurse visit the participant at home instead of the participant going to the clinical site. So if trial activities all take place at the hospital or at the clinical trial unit, we call them standard or conventional. And if everything takes place around the participant, is home, but he can also be at the camping site, of course, wherever the participant is. We call them fully decentralized, and everything in between is often referred to as a hybrid trial. So actually, these are all really nice promises, but most of the things that I said are actually promises, and we need some data. I'm a scientist and I like data. So what we're going to do is with the radial trial, we're going to see if these promises are actually true. And if a decentralized trial design is acceptable, so in terms of safety, data quality, also medical endpoints, and if these decentralized clinical trial designs have maybe potential benefits. So for example, subject retention, recruitment, maybe a diversity in the population, lower costs, and the satisfaction of both the trial, the people who are in the trial, but also who have to maybe do the trial. And for that, we were going to do a study in which we have the same intervention. So the same medicine is applied, is given to the population, but how we do the trial is different in each arm. So for example, we have a conventional arm, which is modeled to a previous trial, which is standard right now. And then we have a hybrid trial, which is a trial that incorporates some of these decentralized elements. And then we also have a remote arm, which is fully decentralized. So these participants, they actually never visit the clinic. And how would that look in practice? Maybe I have some practical examples to show you. So of course, there's different phases in the trial where these decentralized, where there's differences in how they do the trial. For example, in the screening period, at the conventional, in the hybrid arm, people are recruited at the clinical site, and also all the sessions are done at the clinical site. So probably people have to live close to the site, whereas in the remote arm, people are recruited via social media, and we ship all the stuff that's needed for the trial to the patients, and all the visits are done via telemedicine. So using Zoom or whatever platform, probably. And in the treatment period, both groups have apps, so they have that's, I think, is already common practice, but the abilities of the app are different. And for example, in the hybrid and the remote arm, we also have wearables that automatically record dosing and timing of the medicine, whereas in the conventional arm, we do not have those options. Also, the drug will be directly shipped to the patient, which is also actually quite innovative. And the visits are maybe most apparently different. In the conventional arm, they take place at the clinical site, and we also do a blood sample collection there. And the hybrid arm, we have a nurse visit the participant's home, and the nurse then executes the blood sample collection. And in the remote arm, the participant has to do this by him or herself, and there will be a telemedicine visit. So yeah, as I already said, we're interested in a lot of things here. We want to compare the recruitment rates and the retention rates, the different arms. We want to look at the participant characteristics. So maybe the diversity in each of the arms. We want to look at satisfaction, but then also acceptability. Is the compliance to the treatment the same? Is the safety the same? Is the data quality the same? And also the clinical endpoints. So I will now give the word to Suzie-Ann, who will tell you more about what maybe decentralized trials can do for us in rare diseases.
Definitely. Thank you, Bart, for this presentation about the Trials at Home project and the radial study. And thank you, Rick, for inviting us to this interesting session. Now, as Bart already says, my name is Suzie-Ann Bakker, and I'm from the World Duchenne organization. And we're partners in this Trials at Home project. And as we just listened to Bart explaining the pilot on a decentralized clinical trial, or DCT, in diabetes, I want to present the challenges and opportunities that we see in DCT and rare diseases. So next slide, please. Because although we can learn a lot from this proof of concept almost for a DCT on diabetes, there's still many unknowns when it comes to DCTs in rare diseases. So one of the most important differences here is that only 5% of the rare diseases have an approved treatment. And as 1 in 3 people living with the rare disease do not live to see their 5th birthday, the need for new treatments is critical. And as we all know, the clinical trials are needed to test these new drugs and to bring them to the market. But finding drugs to treat the world's most rarest diseases is quite the challenge, because often pharmaceutical companies are less incentivized to develop drugs for such small populations. And this is why rare disease drug innovation is usually driven by patient organizations and small biotech companies. But another challenge is that the patient population is often spread thinly across the globe, and it makes it therefore quite diverse and hard to reach. And there's still many unknowns when it comes to clinical knowledge for many rare diseases, due to the fact that often rare diseases are multi-systemic, so they have a large spectrum of symptoms. But also there are huge populations that still remain undiagnosed, or they don't have a proper diagnosis, and this also impacts the clinical trial opportunities. Now, participating in a clinical trial also poses a heavy burden on the mental and the financial resources of the person participating in the trial and their family. You know, think of having to travel long distances, not being able to stay together as a family, but also the need to travel across borders with a caregiver. Not to mention the fact that living with a rare disease often affects the ability to travel to trial sites. So in essence, the burden on a person living with a rare disease who wants to participate in a trial can be greatly reduced by bringing the study to them. And by addressing these challenges, both data gathering and patient recruitment and retention can be improved. And next slide, please, Bart. Thank you. And this is the reason why the Duchenne community works closely on new clinical trial models and the design of them. And one is on decentralized clinical trials. Now, what we've seen is that due to COVID, almost all the trials struggled to continue, and many of them continued as partly remote trials. And this hybrid approach kind of enabled to be continued and families from remote areas to participate. And this had not only a positive impact on the study recruitment, but it also contributed to a more diverse patient pool, because participant bias is still an issue with clinical trials. So only the best informed, most connected and most involved families are aware of such trials. And these families are usually the top %, and they do not often represent the full rare disease community as a whole. And this is potentially hurting the trial outcomes, as by default, this group performs better than average. So another positive outcome of these semi-DCTs is that because the visits and the procedures were taken in the comfort of their own home, the test results were more reliable. Because in a hospital setting, your heart rate might be naturally a bit higher due to stress, and this affects the test. So in addition to some advantages, we also came across some challenges, of course. And one of them is about the equipment. So some devices, such as wearables, that were used to measure activity, they were not waterproof. So the families didn't know that, they weren't told that. But also some children had to wear devices that were heavy or uncomfortable or just, generally speaking, very uncool. And my personal favorite is the story of a child who attached his activity tracker to their dog to see a funny increase in movement. So using equipment correctly is important. But this also leads us to think, are all types of studies suitable to be converted to decentralized clinical trials? And this actually depends on 3 factors. We got the target population, the protocol design, and the treatment. Next slide, please. So looking at the patient population, it is key to understand where they are, who they are, what is the prevalence of the disease, and how closely those patients are likely to be to the sites. So where do you find them, and how comfortable are they with health visits? Because roughly half of the millennials do not have a primary care doctor, as opposed to 80% of the people older than 50. And in which ways is the technology available in their country, or in their region, or in their home? And how familiar are they with using this technology? I mean, you can ask a young family to download an app. And if you wish to do that in the geriatric population, it's getting more difficult. And also family conditions should be considered. So these socioeconomic levels have a great impact on the way on how they react and how they perform within the DCT. So to summarize, you have to co-develop the protocol with the patient that fits the characteristics, and the preferences of the target population. And the best way of doing so is to reach out to collaborate with the patient experts and the patient organizations. So including these recommendations made by the people living with the disease can increase enrollment and retention. So by talking to the patients, you gain a deeper understanding of what's feasible, considering the environment of the person, whether they are at home or whether they are still able to administer the drug when they are at school or at work. So you have to critically assess your protocol, and you have to recognize which of the procedures should be taken in a hospital setting. And even if it should be performed in a site visit, you can assess whether this should be taken at the study site or whether it can be done in a site or hospital close to the patient's home. Or even, of course, if the site should come to the patient's home. Because, for example, during COVID, many cancer patients did not want to visit the hospital, so the nurses went to the participant's home to administer the infusions. And in addition to considering the target population and the protocol design of the study, the treatment also poses its challenges and opportunities for decentralized clinical trial. So the €1 million question is whether the treatment can be administered at home safely and easily. But also how site visits and logistics are managed. For example, if blood samples need to be taken, how does the pharmacy supplying the treatment do they need any support on the setup? But also which logistics are available to transfer the treatment to the home. Does the courier need a -30°C fridge, or do they need dry ice? So there needs to be a thorough safety review by the treatment by qualified individuals from every perspective. You need to have a nursing perspective, pharmacy, project management, but also the CRA to do a good quality check. Next slide, please. So what are people living with a rare disease looking for in a decentralized clinical trial? Now, the primary concern is how home visits and logistics are managed. Secondly, they want to know how their data is being collected and stored and whether they have access to it after a trial has ended, especially because they are the ones right now that are collecting their individual data. And third, it is key for participants to have access to a professional that can answer any questions and can provide any support, and this will help with compliance. So by involving the patients in the design and the conduct of a decentralized clinical trial, you educate the patient community, which increases patient agency, and it motivates the patient to be more in control and become part of the community. And last but not least, it also offers patients and their families a choice to be in charge of their body and their study. Next slide, please. So as closing thoughts, we see that COVID definitely pushed the development in both hybrid and decentralized clinical trials. And now is really the time to act as a rare disease patient organization to become involved and really catch the DCT wave almost. And at the same time, we have to remember that diabetes and rare diseases are two completely different conditions or fields, because diabetes is a well understood condition. It has an approved treatment, which works really well. Well, the clinical knowledge in rare diseases is often limited, and they often don't have an approved treatment. And this also impacts the willingness and the risk consideration of the participant. And last but not least, the endpoints and outcomes that are collected in DCTs are far more likely to reflect the real world. And this makes DCT data more appreciated by regulatory agencies such as the FDA and the EMA, but also HTA and reimbursement authorities. So I think with that, I've arrived at the end of our presentation. Thank you very much for listening. I hope I'm well on time. And Bart and I are looking forward to answer any questions that you might have. Thank you.
Bart, Suzie-Ann, thank you for a pair of really fascinating presentations, actually. Bart, I love this concept of a trial of clinical trials. That's fascinating and really cool. I'd love to see, how that can advance.
At birthday parties, I also, what do you do? I do research on research. And
it's a little bit meta, I suppose to say, but it's really interesting. And I'd like to see how that could advance, and particularly the response to the community of this concept, something that's purely remote. I mean, that would be very fascinating to understand, and I think we'll dive into that a little bit later. And Suzie-Ann, lovely points there, and particularly, at the end, I think that's really interesting to think that the value of that data in the DCTs might be higher for regulators is a really nice point I hadn't considered. So, again, guys, I think we're starting to get a few questions trickling through on this, and it's great. So we'll come back to that at the end of the session. And thank you for excellent presentations. Bart, if you could stop your screen share now, and we'll bring the next person onto the stage. Thank you. So, guys, obviously, we've been through this idea of preclinical work. We've looked at some of the challenges around running clinical trials. We've also looked at the future clinical trials, I suppose, with the decentralised idea. And we'd hope that's the end. We'd hope you're going to get to access and that's it. But sadly, that isn't always the case. Actually, accessing the treatment, even if it's getting reimbursed, can be challenging, particularly with some of these exceptional advanced therapies that we're seeing. So I'm really pleased to welcome to the stage now Stefano Zancan, who's from Foundation Telethon. He's going to talk about the Just Like Home project that they're working on there, which is all about finding ways to help patients receive gene therapy and how it's actually delivered to patients, and work they're doing to support them in receiving that. So Stefano, thank you for being here, and welcome to the stage.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Rick. I am Stefano Zancan, and I don't know if you all know of the Fondazione Telethon. Fondazione Telethon is a non-profit organization which is dedicated to find a cure for genetic disease and rare disease. And we actually have, I try to open my presentation. Can you see? And we are working on, Fondazione Telethon is working with two research institutes, one in Milan and one in Rome, where we run gene therapy, ex vivo or in vivo gene therapy. The topic of my presentation is how to allow patients to really have access to this gene therapy. And I started from the definition of a gene therapy, which is a method of or a way of approaching a place or person or the right to use or look at something. Or also access to something means the opportunity or ability to use it. For a patient, access to therapy means to have the concrete possibility to receive a treatment. And this can happen if a valid treatment exists, if there is a clinical site where this treatment can be administered, and for gene therapy, this includes the possibility to have an expertise with gene therapy and on the disease to be treated. And the treatment must be available. This is the achievement that at a research institute in Milan we have achieved so far. We have six gene therapy. Actually, MPN6 is conducted in Naples, but however, we have already treated more than 132 patients with gene therapy for ADAS-KIT, viscoelastic syndrome, metachromatic leukodystrophy, beta thalassemia, and mucopolysaccharidosis type 1 and 2. And 2 of this program has been approved by EMA, and now we have stream values for ADAS-KIT and LibMLD for MLD. But for all the ex vivo gene therapy, we remain the only site, at least so far, where this treatment can be administered. This is extremely true for stream values, which is a fresh administration, while for LibMLD, other centers will be open by the licensee in Europe and US. The availability of a drug. This is the standard development process of a product. And so treatment can be available during a clinical trial for participation in a clinical trial, or when it is available as a marketed product. And between the end of recruitment and the completion of all the price agreement and reimbursement procedures, the treatment can be available through expanded access to compassionate use program. But is this enough? I believe it's not, because patient, here is Milan, but patient come from all over the world. And so this means that, in particular for patients with a rare disease, which by definition are rare and widespread around the world, and the clinical sites that can offer this double expertise in gene therapy and on this are very few and will remain few. And so this means that it's the patient who has to travel toward the clinical center, wherever it is. And this implies the need for the family to face traveling issues, to find a lodge, to overcome language barriers, cultural differences, to face a long permanence with an impact on job, school, social life, and to face any individual and family needs that need to be arranged according to around the travels. And of course, they have to face cost. So the clinical side has to develop, to transform in a site that can take care of a patient in a holistic way. It's not enough for a clinical site of this type to simply offer treatment, conduct safety and efficacy assessment, or provide the clinical access, but they have to provide a set of support which start for giving support to organize the travel, the lodging, to overcome the administrative and bureaucratic procedure, the visa, the resident permits in another country, to have a cultural mediator that can facilitate the communication with a patient, of a family, and can explain all the relevant part of a study they are taking care, and also to help the family to organize their life in another country. We have also to offer caregiver that can really help the family in the daily life activities, from babysitting or shopping. And then psychological support, which is also an important part for a patient, a family that remain in Milan, in our case for ex vivo gene therapy, for more than 5 or 6 months. So in 2016, Telethon Foundation has launched the Just Like Home program, which is a group of multidisciplinary staff that work to facilitate the access to therapy for this patient and family that come into Milan to receive the gene therapy. And the name Just Like Home comes exactly from a sentence that you see here in red that was told by a patient: "Thank you for what you have done for me and my mother. I was just like being at home." And this became the name of the program, which is just that, to give the family the possibility to spend as much as serene stayed in Milan during their possibility to receive a treatment. So what the Just Like Home program offer? We gave support to all the patients coming to Milan, independently if they're coming for commercial product, for a compassionate use, or for clinical trials. We always offer the same kind of support, and this kind of support differentiated, it is personalized according to the family needs. There are families that require a cultural mediator, there are families that require additional assistance because they are coming with other brother and sister. And so the support is really customized according to the family needs. This is how the organization is. We have the care coordinator, as the word says, coordinate the activities, all the other staff, interact with the clinical research nurse, and that it is the main point of contact for the family. And at the same time, as to organize the activities for the administrative activities, tickets, visa, accommodation, with a psychologist, with cultural mediator, with any sort of educational needs that that the family needs and we can offer, for example, school or other type of education, professional caregiver and babysitter, sorry again, and any volunteers that can help us to support the family at our best. This is our this is the road from when the patient comes to Milan through the arrival, the permanence in the sterile room, and the post-therapy period. I don't enter into the details here, but just to tell you some anecdote of a family. We remember that a family coming from US expected to find somebody to welcome them at the bottom of the stairs of a plane when they arrived in Milan, and when they didn't find anybody there because we were obviously in the airport hall waiting for them, they entered into panic and started to call friends, patient association, us, from really in a sort of panic mood. Other examples are when the patient is to be prepared to receive the gene therapy, and he passed through a conditioning regimen with chemotherapy. And so some of the mom that assist their son or their daughter cut their hair completely in order to resemble to their child. And another example of a complexity and the different mood that this family face are in the post-therapy period, when a mother was really, the patient was ready to be discharged, and everything was organized to come back home, and the mother kept on losing their flight ticket, the return flight ticket, and we didn't understand why. And so at a certain point, we really entered into conversation with the mother, and she admitted that she was happy to be back home, but at the same time, she was worried because at home she would have been alone without the support that we were able to offer, without the clinical and psychological and all the support that we gave. So this is just an example of what are the different moods that a family face during the period of a treatment, before and after, and how we try to support them. But there are other things that are important. I said we offer the support that I just described, but there is another important factor, which is the cost, how to face the cost of a gene therapy. So, and now, basically, we have developed two roads. We have a Just Like Home program, but at the same time, we run an in-depth analysis on a current European provision for planned treatment abroad. And on this regard, there are two main rules. There is the Social Security regulation, which applies by default to all the countries, and that require no money anticipation by the family, but they need to provide S2 form that allow this exchange and reimbursement of money between Italy and the country of origin of a patient. While the directive instead has to be implemented different locally, require the patient to be anticipate the money and to be reimbursed when it's back home. But both of the two, we selected the Social Security regulation because didn't require any anticipation of money by the family, and it is something that can be implemented equally in all the countries. But both of these laws cover only the drug and the treatment cost. No other costs are covered. So the logistic, the travels are not cost by these laws. So on the contrary, Just Like Home doesn't offer any hospitalization and treatment costs, but in exceptional circumstances, we are willing to provide economical support to the family to come to receive the treatment. And this support is based on the real possibility of a family. We check if the country origin allow or provide some kind of support, if there is any personal insurance, if there is some fundraising activities that can be conducted. And when there is no other alternative of a family to come, we, as Just Like Home, we are willing to cover some or total of a cost, really depending on each family situation. Here it is a summary of what the cost imply, but because the situation is very different. There are because patient, as I said, can come from in a commercial setting, expanded access, or in clinical trials, and also that depends on the provenance of the patient. So for a clinical trial, all the costs, the drug, the clinical cost, and the travel and lodging are covered by the sponsor of a clinical trial, while Just Like Home staff instead obviously is covered by Fondazione Telethon in majority of the things. In some cases, we needed to identify and to hire some dedicated cultural mediator interpreter, which in the case of a clinical trial will be reimbursed by the sponsor. For expanded access program, only the drug is provided by the licensing, by the owner of a product. And so the clinical cost has to be managed for European patient through the S2 form. But this is not true for patients coming from extra-European, and they really need to have some private fund, insurance, country of origin funding to cover for the clinical cost. The same applies for the travel and lodging, as just said, that if there is something that can be used, we will use, otherwise, Just Like Home cover the difference of the total. For commercial setting, the drug has to be paid. And again, for European countries, patient, for European country patient, we use the S2 form that cover the drug and the clinical cost. But again, for patient coming from extra-European, there is no proper way to cover the cost. And so there is the need to, as really a support of a country origin or whatever, any other fund that the family can have. And again, Just Like Home can cover the logistic cost. So which are the conclusion, the take-home message that I want to leave you, is that the rare and ultra-rare disease affect only a few patients per year in Europe. So in some countries may have very few patients affected by a given disease. Complex and rare disease require high specialized treatment, especially for gene therapy. And when we deal with advanced therapy medicine product. So they really require expertise, and this expertise is not cannot be found in every in every center or next door to the patient. And it is really complicated to establish a specialized center in every country. It much make more sense to leave the patient to travel through the specialized clinical center that exist and can be validated by the sponsor in order to offer by the sponsor, by the medicine owner, in order to properly treat the patient there. And such clinical center has to be prepared to welcome patients from abroad and offer an holistic approach similar to what Just Like Home program offers. And so they have to have a structure dedicated to the patient management. It will be really important, I believe, to establish a process to have the travel and logistic costs covered by the country origin, as for Europe is done for drug or clinical cost. Because in the absence, and this should be also, in any case, left uncover the problem of a patient that come from outside the European Union, because in our almost half of our patients come from outside Europe, and so will be in that country will be really improbable that even in the future there will ever be a specialized center able to offer such advanced treatment. And I have to say that without the contribution of Just Like Home, some of these patients will never be able to receive the treatment and to come to Milan to receive the treatment. So it is, again, this is something that I really like to see in the future, a way to for the country origin to find the possibility to fund travel and lodging costs for European patients, but also for extra-European patients, which otherwise may risk to be not to have access at a therapy that exists and is potentially available to them. Thank you.
Stefano, thank you so much. It's a fascinating talk. And when you were speaking, it reminded me of something that Emerson said in our session last night, which was talking about the difference between access to a medicine and making a medicine accessible, accessibility itself, making sure there are ways it can be effectively reach the patient, provision to the patient. And you just really summarized that point amazingly well with these complex therapies, the need to find ways to make sure the expertise is in the right place, but that those patients can actually experience that delivery in comfort is really challenging. It's amazing what you managed to put forward to it. So thank you for sharing. At this point, I'd like to ask the rest of our speakers to turn on their cameras, and we're going to try and have a little bit of a question and answer session with you all. So thank you all for the great talks. I think it's been a really interesting session that's taken us right through that reach of treatment development arc. So thanks for that. Marta, I know you're about, if you wanted to join the questions, you're more than welcome, but don't feel the need to. Hi, Marta, nice to see you. Okay, guys, so there's such a breadth of things we could talk about here. I think everyone's touched on in some way that crucial need to bring the patient perspective, the patient voice into the heart of the research process and development of treatments right throughout. But to do that, obviously, there's a need to reach and communicate with those patients very clearly as well. And that can be very challenging in this space, finding a clear way to communicate complex trial information, health information, the narratives of what might happen to them at treatment provision. So I'd be really interested to hear some of your thoughts on how we can improve that kind of communication in this realm of treatment development and what you're doing in your specific projects. So I wonder if maybe, as I think your talk touched on it a bit more, maybe Bart and Suzie would like to start on there, and then we bring in some of the other speakers. So yeah, over to you guys.
Thanks. Bart, do you mind if I take this one as a patient organisation? Okay, great. So usually what we do as a patient organisation is that we provide the neutral setting between either a company or a CRO and the patient to really hear from each other experiences. So what we did, we set up the Duchenne Community Advisory Board, or the CAB. And this consists of specific and trained patient experts, and they can then be in a neutral setting discussing any kind of issues that arise with clinical trials with companies. So, for example, you talk about the amount of muscle biopsies that need to be taken and whether it should be possible, because if you're a rare disease, if you have a muscle dystrophy, having a biopsy is quite invasive. But we're also discussing other types, such as administration of the treatment, whether it should be an infusion or a pill, or the size of the pill, because if you're running a pediatric trial, a pill can be quite difficult.
Fantastic. Thank you, Suzie-Ann. I appreciate that. Stefano, any thoughts on your side of that? Because the complexity of what patients can experience to receive treatment is huge. So how do you communicate that so clearly across all those languages as well? Oh, sorry, Stefano, you're still muted.
We generally, the process start that before the patient come, we organize a video conference with a local physician, with a family, and we certainly receive some information in advance in order to understand the language and go there with an interpreter in order to speak directly with the family. At that stage, we certainly explain the path to gene therapy. At the same time, we collect the specific needs that we have to face in order to welcome the patient. So it is really a very complex and complete moment in which we have to explain everything that the family and the local physician needs to know before taking this decision. And at the same time, we collect information in order to be able to manage them at best if they decide to come.
Thanks.
And I also appreciated what Bart and Suzie-Ann said, because our study, gene therapy, required to have a very long follow-up. So if it is critical to have a patient in Milan during the treatment of a month immediately after, in the long term, the decentralized management of a patient is important, because especially during COVID pandemic, many of them didn't want to come, were fair to come to face a long travel to Milan. And so we have to manage to collect safety information for the patient with a local physician or directly at home through teleconference or whatever we were able to put in place.
Thanks, Stefano. That's fantastic, and it is such challenging level of detail you're passing on. You must be needing to make checks and going back and referring to make sure people have absorbed that complexity at a time that must be quite stressful for them, which I think you've touched on.
Yeah, but it's also gratifying.
Yeah, definitely. Simone, you're in this unique position, which I really enjoyed in your talk, where you've come from that background within the neurofibromatosis community, now moving into the research side. Communicating what is happening at that early stage of research development is crucial to the community. So I wondered how you're tackling that and how Healx are thinking about that level of communication about the work you're trying to do.
Thanks. I think that constantly stay connected with each other. It's extremely important, and of course you need to have some processes, right? When you have multiple collaborations and so on. And it's very important to constantly stay connected with catch-ups and ways to connect, and also remembering each other. At the end of the day is, when do I have something relevant to share, and with whom? It goes back to that basic, right? And if there is something relevant to share, that it's either from the company or from the foundation, that's the right moment to reach out and share. It's good to have like milestones and remembering each other every now and then, but it's also good to always keep in mind, like, is this helping someone? Does someone need it? Why? And how can I best deliver that? And of course, when we have an open collaboration and an existing collaboration on a project, there are these touch points. But we also try at Healx also to reach out via webinars to the community and essentially share what we think can help the community. So there is a little bit of a one-to-one, and also a sort of a one-to-many and many-to-one in other cases.
Brilliant, thank you, Simone. Just seen a question sneak in, which I think is relevant to this topic, asking about the use of plain language summaries of medical publications, and if that's something that any of you guys have been trying to explore in some of the projects that you're doing.
Well, I don't think that in specifically medical publications, but what we do try is ask the companies or the research organizations to come with a lay summary. And at the same time, we're educating our patient organizations, because you don't want to dumb things down, you only want to educate the people. So at the one time, we want to make sure that these lay summaries are available for everyone. And specifically when they come in the form of infographics or even animations for our children that explain what the study is about. And at the same time, we are having training sessions which explain what exactly, any medical terminology is, or what the clinical trials exactly entail.
Thank you, Suzie-Ann, that's amazing. Michael and Marta, actually, I want to come to you guys as well. Communication in the rare bone disorder space is really important, right? And I wondered what your thoughts and reflections were on how you've been able to communicate about some of your work down the years into the patient groups, but also the crucial way of communicating the clinical trial itself.
I'll start off and be interested in Marta's thoughts as well. I think the key in all of this, as some of the other speakers have mentioned already, is making sure that you start that conversation early enough. There have been a few quite bad examples of situations where just even some relatively simple things, like some of the language that's used has led to difficulties for other groups in some of the research that they've done. So I think starting those conversations as early as possible with individual patients, with patient groups, is enormously helpful. I would say this, wouldn't I? But all joking apart, the interactions we've had with you and your group have been hugely helpful in that, both in the specifics of the work that we've been doing and more generally around these issues. So I would certainly encourage others to do the same, because we've had a fantastic relationship with you and your team, and it's been enormously beneficial to us. I think the other thing is the importance of involving, particularly in rare disease trials, local clinicians in the centres from which who are normally providing care for the participants in the trial, to ensure that they are also aware of what's going on, so that they understand what we're trying to achieve. Because it's so easy for there to be a disconnect between the clinical care that people are getting and their involvement in trials. And I do feel that's a very important element of this as well.
Thank you, Michael. Anything you want to add, Marta?
On the communication of trial, I agree clearly with everything that Michael said. And I just wanted to add, it's really difficult to balance, as clinicians and researchers, to balance the enthusiasm we may have when we start a new trial and the hope that we will have a new treatment, but remaining down to earth and reminding that it's research. So it's a big commitment for family and it may not work. So we don't want to put down families to be involved in research, but we really need to be clear that we are not at the treatment stage yet for something that we know it works. And it's really difficult to have that balance when we start new, exciting research.
Absolutely, Marta. Thanks for raising that point. I think it's really important to pull out. And there's a personal connection there when you're a clinician as well with those patients. There'll be people you've worked with and seen, and you want to drive that. And there's a huge amount of tension, I think, in the people that are involved, the clinical face of these trials. So it's really important to be aware of that. Thank you. We're closing up, so I just wanted to quickly come to Bart. I just want to come back to this trial of trials and the idea of this pure remote trial. This seems exciting and terrifying. I just wondered what the broad response had been to this concept within the patient community, within the clinical community, and is there a hope to move that forward at some point?
Yeah, I think before COVID, we thought that we would be doing a lot of convincing people like this is the way to go. But now it seems that it's different. It's people think, okay, this is the way. It's already happening, and it's also like I'm not, although I'm talking about the DCTs, I'm not like advocating for them, because although I think that can be promising, but we really want to have, okay, maybe there are some things that might not be so good, and then we want to find them and then see what we can improve on them and make recommendations on them, because yeah, in the end, I think we want to just improve clinical trials as a whole. Yeah.
Bart, may I ask you one question to you, to Suzie-Ann, because did you need to get any ethical or regulatory approval in the country when the patient lives and you are collecting data through video, through telemedicine?
Yeah, we are currently in the process of doing the regulatory approval. I also saw a comment in the chat on e-consent, on consenting to join a trial from abroad, and yeah, there are many hoops to jump here, I would say. So yeah, that's going to be challenged. That's the next. The coming months is going to be determining in that sense for us.
Thank you. Thanks for the question, Stefano, and thanks, Bart, for answering that and picking on the chat as well. We'll look forward with interest to see what develops there and with all of the projects. It's been a really enjoyable session, guys. I've really enjoyed listening to all the presentations, and we've got a great story running through it. And thank you for you all for sharing your thoughts and answers to questions and comments with us, and for your time. It kind of leaves it to me just to begin to wrap up a little bit. It's been great to have you all here. We've got a few more sessions coming up quite soon. So we've got a pitch and mix kind of networking session with some writing talks starting at 12:30 UK time, or about in half an hour. So please do sign up and hop over there, guys, if you'd like to take a chance to network some more. We'll also be having some more breakout sessions starting at 1:45 UK time. So we have Healx. Obviously, we're going to dive into the work on collaborations, and you can go there to find the results of Simone's last part of the survey. And please do continue answering that if you've got the link open. Sandra Butterworth is going to be talking about some multi-method research from RareQual, who you saw speaking on the first session, the first day, and Daniel Nissen talking about mental health issues as well, which will be a great session. So please do sign up and register for those. Really enjoyed the session, guys. Thank you all for that. I'm going to share my screen now and just say a big thank you to all our audience. Thank you for your engagement, and we look forward to hearing more from you. And that's the end for now. See you soon.